Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Well, we celebrate today the beginning of the new year, but mostly the riddance of the old one. Most of the news in 2020 was overshadowed by COVID, especially in business, where the pandemic shaped just about everything. We'll look tonight at the year's top local business stories, including a couple that developed independent of the virus. Joining us are tonight's Informed Sources, Errol Laborde, producer of Informed Sources, Kimberly Singletary, managing editor, Biz New Orleans Magazine, and Rich Collins, Associate News Director, Biz New Orleans Magazine. Okay, Errol, we're going to go over to you because over at Biz Magazine, these two folks that we have as our panelists tonight wrote a story, a pretty comprehensive story about the impact, business stories of 2020 and the impact of COVID. And so you were going to go over this with them.
Yeah, they faced the task of trying to develop the business stories of the year, which a lot of media do that every year. But what was different about it is once you looked at it, just about everything was shaped and influenced by COVID. There are a couple of things that got by, a couple of things that happened earlier in the year, but just a big picture, everything about the year was really shaped by the pandemic, including most of all what was number one on the list, and that was the impact on tourism, which was devastating. I remember a few months ago, Lauren Scott, the LSU economics professor emeritus, gave this big State of the State economic report, which he does every year. But man, it was gloomy this year, and it was especially gloomy for New Orleans because he says New Orleans depends so much on tourism. When things are well, that really just bodes well for us. But the city is really hurting because of the decline in tourism. And we even saw a couple weeks ago when Jefferson Parish got its economics report that Jefferson Parish's situation wasn't quite as gloomy because they depend more on retail. They have a lot of the major retail, whereas we have a lot of kind of secondary things now. Mm-hmm. And so the decline in tourism is something that's really, really crucial. Now, the whole world is facing this. I mean, every town that has any bit of tourism to it is suffering from that. And the good news is that when they try to recover, we have more to offer as a tourism destination. But it's something that's really hurting right now. Another story was when the PPP loans came. The work that the local banks did by pitching in and trying to figure out how to administer it. And as one bank president has pointed out, that rather than having some bureaucracy doing this, that the local banks were the ones who knew best how to handle it. Third was oil and gas. What happened to gas? I mean, you could see, by March or April, if you just drove around and you could see the highways and the roadways were empty. And one reason is people didn't have anywhere to go. They weren't driving to work, they weren't taking a vacation because there were no vacation destinations, and so. Oil and gas use took a stiff decline, for jet fuel in all sorts of different ways. And, for this area, which, tourism is really important, but also important is oil and gas. And so we took hits in two different directions, and severe hits, which we really haven't recovered from. And then the fourth area is affordable housing, that we've faced a situation of maybe not enough affordable housing, and then also people being able to afford it. And that became an issue. And Kim pointed out that there are some groups that really took an effort, a leadership effort, in trying to developing more affordable housing alternatives. Kim, you want to comment on that? Or?
Yeah. So Housing NOLA has been a big force for that. And Andrea Morris is the head of that. And she is actually one of our executives of the year that we have 13 that we profiled for our January issue. It's out today, actually. And she was one of the many helpers. We usually will talk about, the big deal makers of the year. And unfortunately, we didn't have a whole lot of that going on. So we kind of switched gears and really focused on the helpers and the people that are really working. And that affordability crisis was made much, much worse because of COVID.
Right. It has been made much worse because of COVID. And because, for one thing, so many of so many people here, so much of our population is employed in the hospitality industry, and the hospitality industry has taken a huge hit, as has tourism. So what are you guys finding in terms of tourism coming back? Rich, let's bring you in on this one too, because you and Kim work together on this story. What are you finding about tourism? Is it starting to make at least some steps toward coming back?
So I did reach out to Stan Harris at the Restaurant Association today. I just wanted to see if I could get updated numbers before I came on, because one of the numbers that I heard all throughout the year was that we were going to lose maybe 30% of restaurants, maybe more, you know, especially in the city and especially downtown. So they don't have solid numbers yet. I feel like, just anecdotally, maybe we're not losing as many as people had originally expected. But what he did say, what their office said, is that 80% of restaurant operators right now have reporting lower income than they did a year ago, of course, from the previous October, and the average income is down 30%. So, I mean,
so there's
when we talked to and Rich talked to Jessica Knox. She's the owner of Back of Town Coffee back in April, so early on in the pandemic, and she said that their sales had gone from $1,000 a day to having $17 days.
Yeah, so this is really, and we're going to touch on those restaurants in a little bit more. Right now, I kind of want you guys to look into the hotels. If you could tell us, how are the hotels doing? Are we starting to see that pick up at all?
So it is one of the strange things that helped with the hotels was all the hurricanes and all of the evacuees that ended up getting housed in hotels. So during the summer, a lot of the downtown hotels were literally in single-digit occupancy, especially on weeknights. Now, I think for the year, they're looking at 25% or better. But a decent amount of that came from the evacuees staying in the hotels. But numbers are definitely better. The problem is it's not going to come back until you can have meetings or weddings of any type of size. So that's the big thing everyone's holding their breath on. You know, the convention center, everybody else is waiting to see if we're going to be able to, probably not first quarter, but maybe second quarter, they'll be able to start having some events again.
But you know, when that transition,
we had over. Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, when that transition was made a few weeks ago with Harrah's, with the new name and new ownership, first thing they said, we're building a new hotel, and that kind of surprised me in this environment.
Right, Kim, what were you going to say?
Oh, I was going to say that the hurricanes, we had over 10,000 people in the city because of the hurricane that came through. So Zeta and hit us really hard. So yeah, that was awful, obviously, for that part of our state, but a real helpful thing for our local
tourism industry. And you know, touching on once again, revisiting really quickly the affordable housing crisis too. We have been in an affordable housing crisis even before the pandemic set upon us. Rents have just been going up, and salaries just have not to help people pay for their rent. So does Andronicia, does she have any sort of insight as to how this is moving along? Is it getting any better? Will it get better soon?
So back in the fall, the Housing NOLA came out with a big report warning of a foreclosure crisis in the next 4 months. That in September, 36,000 households were not able to pay their mortgage, and you know that they just saw that going worse and worse. And so the call was really to get more funding, to get support from the state, from the federal government, to help address that.
Okay, let's move on to this next chunk, and we'll stick with you, Kim, because you have some certain items, too, that you wanted to talk about. We touched a little bit on trying to save the restaurants. This has just really been very difficult for a really big industry in our area. And aside from industry, it's just something that we like to do. It's part of our culture. We love to go out to eat. How many are going to be able to make it through this?
Well, like Rich said, I mean, the early thought was we'd lose about 40% of our restaurants, and we're hoping that it doesn't hit that hard. That's something the Louisiana Restaurant Association has kind of warned about. But we have lost. We already know some really big ones. K. Paul's was one that got a lot of attention that closed. I know Uptown by me, Dick and Jenny's, down the bayou. some real favorites that are not coming back.
But you know what's going to be a big change is that the outdoor seating now, and you drive around town and you're seeing things that you've never seen before, that you're seeing places. At first it was a question of just putting a few tables and chairs outside. Now they're really developing the areas with shaded areas and all that. And I think that's going to be the new look of restaurants. And you're going to see more people, dining outdoors. It's going to always be susceptible to the weather, but restaurants are going to have a new look in the future.
One thing that worries me about that, there's a restaurant, I won't say it because it's a great restaurant, but near me uptown, and they've created this really beautiful outdoor space, but now that it's getting colder, they've enclosed it. It's got like plastic tenting all around it, and it kind of looks like an incubator. It looks more dangerous than just eating inside with proper ventilation. But I was going to say one thing about the restaurants that's interesting is that there's a tension between the conventional wisdom is that national chain restaurants that have deep pockets and more capital will be able to survive this year better than mom and pops, who are sometimes going month to month. But what's interesting is New Orleans people are so loyal to their neighborhood restaurants, to the locally owned restaurants versus an Applebee's, that it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out for the rest of this year, because if you notice the ones that everyone's rallying around to support, it's going to be your Katie's in Mid-City or Joey K's on Magazine Street. It's the ones that are owned by locals and patronized by locals.
Right. I think one thing too that we restaurateurs have learned, and certainly we as their customers, takeout. I mean, you see more and more restaurants that now, if they have the parking spaces available, they designate it for takeout, and they've worked out a system where you call the restaurant and you tell them what parking spot you're in, and come bring me my food. I think that's probably something that we're going to see continuing in our restaurant trade too.
Yeah, all the innovation that the restaurateurs have done this year that's one of the positive stories, I would say. Whether it's people doing takeout and also simplifying their menus, right? So instead of having 60 items, you have 20 items you can do at a decent cost, and you can do it at your expected quality. And also focusing on things that travel well, because I remember talking to somebody who owns 4 or 5 restaurants in town, and he was saying that his menu, which they're proud of, a lot of the items which are delicious if you get them straight from the kitchen, don't work well out of styrofoam, so they had to adapt.
Okay, Kim, let's go over to the next item, and we sort of touched on it a little bit, but it really was quite the storm season, and that had a real impact on businesses.
Yeah, we had a record season. The Atlantic hurricane season was unbelievable. We had 30 named storms this year. That broke the record of 28 that was set back in 2005. We were in the cone of uncertainty about 7 times, and 5 of them actually hit in different areas of the state each time. But the one that obviously that hit us, we kind of skated by New Orleans for quite a while, and then October 28th, our luck ran out, and we had Zeta hit. So in that one, we lost 470,000 people lost power. And really, really hit the city hard at a time when we definitely didn't need it.
Right, when businesses were just maybe starting to come back to some level, various businesses, then they couldn't operate because of no power. Okay, but those businesses, as you write, battle over restrictions. That's the next item on your list.
Yeah, we had, the pandemic was hitting everybody really hard, and that causes a lot of anger and frustration, and there definitely was a battle this year between the government and business in some respects, and John Bell Edwards got a lot of that. LaToya Mayor Cantrell got a lot of that. We had some business owners that have sued Edwards. We had Edwards sue back the House of Representatives. So we've had a lot of battles going on because of the COVID restrictions, and business, especially bar owners, being hit really hard.
And of course, Mayor Cantrell and the governor said, this is all in the matter of public health. We don't like doing this, but we got to get our numbers down if we want to have an economy for the future.
Yeah, it was really, it's been unprecedented times. So everybody's kind of doing the best they can.
Okie doke. And the last item on your chunk here is residential real estate soars over commercial. Soars and commercial, not so much. So what happened there?
Well, everybody's stuck at home. All of a sudden, so that was what would hit in March. All of a sudden, people thought, I need a pool, or I need more space, or I'm working from home and my kids are at home, and all of a sudden, my house feels really small. And so there was a lot going on. Plus, we have historic low interest rates. We have very low supply. I know somebody came to one of our publishers' luncheons and was talking about how a healthy market has about 6 months worth of supply of housing, and we have about 3 months right now. So all of those things coming together have really kept those prices strong, especially in areas like Uptown.
But we see office buildings that suddenly were really, for the most part, deserted, and people learning to work from home. Is that something to stay?
Yeah, I think people aren't sure yet. I think what's we're hearing mostly is it's going to end up to be a hybrid. That when restrictions are lifted, that you're going to have more people doing a mix. Coming in maybe a few days a week, things like that. So I don't think we'll lose office space completely, but there might be some downsizing. Yeah. I think some people already are. And on the flip side, some people are going for bigger spaces so that they can distance workers.
Right. I mean, workers are also learning to work from home. At first, it was really kind of difficult for a lot of folks because they had everybody in the family was there. Where do you go to actually get work done? But I'm hearing more and more people say, I kind of like this. Like you said, it could be perhaps a hybrid where people are going into the office sometimes and then staying home too. I mean, this pandemic has really made us all rethink and rework our lifestyles.
That's going to be a big way that the world has changed. And one business, I mean, imagine people in the real estate business who rent out office space. I think those people are going to be facing some real issues. They already are. I mean, it's not going to be the same in the future in terms of the capacity of office buildings.
It does feel like we're waiting for the shoe to drop. We've had this residential bubble that's kept things positive, but because of the retail side of things as well, restaurants and retailers that may not be in business next year, so that space is going to be available. It's interesting. There's a block on Magazine Street, the block below where Whole Foods is, where it looks like more than half of it is empty right now. And so I think that you're going to see next year, as leases come up, more of the effects of what happened this year be evident. And I feel like ultimately that's going to eventually trickle over and affect what's happening on the residential side.
All righty, Rich, let's stick with you also and take a look at some of the other areas that you want to discuss. First up for you, healthcare embraces telemedicine.
Right. So, I mean, this has been an unprecedented year for healthcare providers for a variety of reasons. Obviously, they had to figure out how to set up testing, how to get all of the equipment they need, whether it's the PPE or the ventilators and all these things where there were shortages, and just the logistics of getting the equipment and pivoting to take care of people. But one of the more unexpected and biggest surprises in healthcare was that telemedicine, by necessity, just skyrocketed. And so I actually talked to someone at Ochsner today just to get the most fresh number. In 2019, Ochsner Health had hosted 3,000 telemedicine visits. In 2020, it will have hosted 280,000 telemedicine visits.
That's quite the jump, isn't it?
Yes. So it's interesting. I mean, it's just because no one felt comfortable doing an in-person visit because of social distancing, people had to shift gears to this new technology. And so there was concerns that, people that weren't comfortable with technology might not be able to figure out how to sign up or download the app. But what they found was family members worked together, they overcame all that, and they did it. What they've also learned now, as people are starting to go back to seeing the doctors in person, is that there is definitely pros and cons. So telemedicine works great for, say maybe mental health type visits. It works really well for some general doctor visits. It doesn't work as well necessarily for something where the doctor needs to be able to diagnose something in person. So maybe somebody with a cardiac a heart condition, anything like that. So they've already started to realize what the pros and cons of telehealth. All
right, another area that you wanted to discuss, unemployment.
Well, yeah. So obviously the big story with tourism being on ice right now. New Orleans has record unemployment numbers, but specifically the unemployment fund for the state is, to put it nicely, is bankrupt. So in March, there was $1.1 more than $1 billion in the state's unemployment trust fund. By October, it was essentially empty. And what that's supposed to do, once it drops below a certain threshold, is that's supposed to, by law, what happens is business owners have to pay a higher unemployment tax, and people who are receiving unemployment insurance have to their numbers drop, right? The amount that they can receive. No one wanted that to happen this year, so basically what the legislature ended up doing this fall was they punted, they passed, they decided that they're going to freeze the taxes and freeze the unemployment numbers where they are and deal with it next year. And so what they're doing right now is borrowing money from the federal government to pay unemployment. And eventually next year that's going to have to be dealt with.
But people are still receiving unemployment checks, even with the struggles of the fund.
They are right now, and then depending on what happens in Washington today, or hopefully today, there will be that extra $300 boost, federal boost again. So it's pretty common knowledge that Louisiana's weekly unemployment benefit is at near the bottom for the whole country.
Yeah, it's low.
And so I think we're at the highest you can get is $247 or something.
Yeah. So
this would more than double it with that federal boost. And I know that the higher federal boost from earlier in the pandemic literally was a lifeline for tens of thousands of people.
Right, it kept the economy going a little bit too, because people had some money to spend and also they could maybe pay some rent. All right, some other non-COVID stories that you wanted to touch on.
Oh, right.
Dixie Beer.
Yeah, so there were a few non-COVID stories. This one's interesting because it's kind of the whole story of the year. You know, I guess as everyone knows, when Tom Benson was alive, Tom and Gail Benson purchased the Dixie Brewing Company, or at least the majority interest in Dixie beer, back in 2017. And then Tom Benson died in 2018. And then in August of that year, Gail Benson announced the plans to build the brewery back in New Orleans East. It ended up being a $32 million investment that opened up to great fanfare in January of 2020, right before everything shut down. So the brewery is beautiful. It's this, sprawling facility. It's where the McFrugals used to be. I think it's 85,000 square feet with all sorts of, it's food and places for the kids to play. They host music. It's a beautiful investment. It's part of the Bensons, commitment to trying to preserve, New Orleans brands and things that could otherwise be in danger. But obviously then the pandemic pretty much slowed down the whole process. But more importantly and more interestingly, just after spending all that money to relaunch the brand and do everything they did in June of 2020, in response to all of the social justice movement and everything going along with that conversation, Gail Benson announced that she was going to change the name, and by November of this year, just last month, they announced it's the Faubourg Brewing Company. So it was a busy year for Gail Benson.
Definitely. Well, it's always, I think, a busy year for Gail Benson. She's involved in a lot. Bless her heart, she really does a lot for our community, too, that's for sure. So I really like that name, Faubourg. That sounds very, very nice. Faubourg Brewing. Okay, one more thing, LCMC.
Yeah, and then the others, other just big, in any other year, this would have been a huge story. It just kind of gets pushed to the end of this list because of COVID. But finally, after years of debate, LCMC Health finally completed the purchase of East Jefferson Hospital. It was a very popular move. I think 95% of the parish voters approved the move.
Right.
The hesitation was that that had been there for 50 years. It had been independent. And people really liked the fact that it was their community hospital. It was a public hospital. But just times have changed. And so with consolidation in the industry, it was bound to happen. And it turned out to be a good deal. They were in debt. The debt's been wiped out, and now they joined the family. It's also Children's, New Orleans East Hospital, Toro, UMC, and West Jeff.
Right, and I mean this change really was years in coming, and it had been quite controversial. As you said, the voters of Jefferson Parish said, "This deal we like, let's go for it."
Yeah, I mean, finally, because they had $135 million in debt at this point, and basically, I think the LCMC paid $90 million and then promised to invest another $100 million over the next 5 years. It preserves the 3,000 jobs. And there's definitely pros and cons and debates about all the mergers in healthcare, because the people in favor say that it's going to economy of scale will lower prices, and then other people say that lack of competition is going to raise prices, and you can see evidence for both, but we'll just have to see what happens.
All righty, guys. Well, perhaps there was some good stories, you think, that happened in 2020? I mean, 2020 was definitely a rough year for all of us, but let's think about maybe the positive things that happened. E?
Well, with the cruise ship business was doing really well, and we've pretty much lost that for now. Now some of it's going to come back. It'll recover. But what'll be different about it, in addition to like the Gulf cruises, is we're going to see a real growth in the river cruises. We've had some before, but we're going to see a dramatic increase, especially with Viking cruises. And Vikings due to come back like in 2022, early 20s, and they already have commitments. They're signing up people up and down the river as destinations and building docks and all that. And it's going to be a different kind of crowd. It's going to be a crowd that doesn't want to fly to Europe to take a boat, but that likes the leisure of a river cruise. And so that's going to be a bigger part of our cruise industry in the future.
All right. Kim?
I think one thing that's really happened this year is we've really seen the giving increase. I think anybody that's been in news for any amount of time knows that we have a very unique culture, and everybody kind of takes care of each other, and we're not new to struggles. But there is a huge amount of support. And just as an example, our Give NOLA Day that happens every year, we were up in 2020 by 1.2 million over 2019. So people are really giving, and the organizations are really stepping up. And we have organizations like the New Orleans Business Alliance that jumped in within a few days of the shutdown and have got over, I think it's 1.35 million for gig economy workers, which is so much of our workers. So just a lot of giving, a lot of coming together, which is great to see.
I know we saw groups, helping restaurant owners and helping healthcare workers and helping musicians. You're quite right. People coming together during a tough time. Rich, wrap up with you.
I'll do two quickies. One is that I think there's been a lot of creativity in the restaurant world. I'm thinking of specific Robert LeBlanc and Smith, who owns 4 or 5 different restaurants, plus the Chloe on St. Charles Avenue, the new hotel. And he created a whole new business model where he put everybody on salary and gave everyone kind of a shared ownership of the entire operation. And it was just sort of a response to the thought that COVID is a disaster, but there was things we could have improved in the restaurant world before COVID. So that one I think is exciting. I want to see what happens.
Okay, real quick for the second.
Real quick, it's all the investment downtown. So things are terrible right now, but you've got $500 million going into the Four Seasons, $300 million going into Harrah's. They're doing the zoo, they're doing the ferry terminal. The convention center's got hundreds of millions. So I think a few years from now, a lot of people are banking on things being back.
Okay, so a lot to feel good about for 2021. We're in it now. We're finished 2020. Thanks a lot for joining us, guys. Really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks for joining us on the Informed Sources. Good to have you here. Thank you all for watching, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Happy New Year.